Right, Professor Graziano, how's it going?
Very good. How are you?
I'm good, thank you. So Professor Graziano is a professor at Princeton and of psychology and neuroscience. Just reading here off his Wikipedia page, his scientific research focuses on the brain basis of awareness. He's known for proposing an attention schema theory, an explanation for how and what adaptive advantage brains contribute to themselves by presumably having the property of awareness. His previous work has focused on how the cerebral cortex monitors the space around the body, controls movement within that space, and plenty of other work. Also, Professor Graziano writes novels, including for children, and very interestingly composes symphonies, if I'm not mistaken.
That's correct. Yes.
That's right, right. Which is a very great guy, interesting guy, and we hope to have a productive conversation. And so he has a degree from Princeton and the graduate degree in neuroscience from MIT. And now he's a professor at Princeton. Right. All right. So I'm thinking, Professor, we can go over some of your current interests and research, and
Sure.
we can hear on your end, and then we can get into a little bit of discussion about those topics.
Sure. So yes, I study the topic of consciousness, how the brain is related to consciousness, and I think unlike other people who study the topic for decades or centuries, this topic has been a philosophical topic. It's been a question of human insight into ourselves and our nature. And for some people, it's a sort of mystical or spiritual topic. I think unlike that entire world of study, for me, the study of consciousness is about technology, and it's about the immediate future of technology, because a lot of people, a lot of engineers are really interested in understanding how to take those kinds of components and build them into machines. And this is a lot of what I do, is understand, not at a philosophical level, but at an engineering level, what is going on in here that makes us walk around as these conscious beings, and what's the blueprint for building that stuff. And also, what are the implications, the societal implications, and even the ethical implications are questions that I deal with. So that's kind of what I do.
Yeah, no, that sounds very, very interesting. What, where are you at right now in terms of your philosophical and scientific views concerning consciousness and its relation to the brain?
Well, we have a pretty good idea. So we're building off of work that has been going on for a long time, perhaps 50 years now, of people slowly piecing together a logic, a background logic to understand what's really going on in here, and what we call consciousness. So everything we think we know about ourselves, every person who introspects and says, I'm this, I'm that, I have these components inside me, that's all derived from information built and constructed by specialized systems in the brain. So it's all, in a sense, it all comes down to information in specific systems. And so that's one of the initial most important insights that's, as I said, been around for about 50 years. And we've been slowly piecing together what those systems are, exactly what they're computing, why human brains builds these very interesting self models. And so we think we're coming to some understanding there, and just beginning to figure out how to take some of these components and put them in machine form.
Okay, okay. So when we say that consciousness is derived from the brain, and we can, and from an information-based model, what is, can you get into a little bit what the basis of such a understanding is?
Sure. So one of the things that we focus on is this process called attention. And attention is sort of a tricky word because it has so many colloquial connotations. But in the brain has a trick that it uses that evolved long before people were around. It evolved from the very beginning of the very first nervous systems. Attention is a trick that takes the vast amounts of information flowing in at any one time and winnows it down and focuses in on one or two things that are of importance to process in great depth at any moment. And so this process of attention is terribly important. Excuse me. And we not only need to have it, we need to control it. We need to strategically move that focus of attention from this object to a thought, to a memory, to a decision that we're making. So attention is kind of the key, how to control and monitor and use our own attention. And so at the heart of all of this mechanism is attention control. And when we say, I have a conscious experience of something, like I'm looking at you and I have a conscious experience of looking at you and talking to you, what that really means pragmatically is my brain is focusing attention on you. So attention and conscious experience go in tandem very, very closely.
Yeah, no, it's a very interesting take, and definitely sounds like it is informed by the latest scientific findings, as opposed to, as he mentioned, kind of millennia old kind of metaphysical introspection. And I think that's what we need. But at the same time, I think there's room for carefully analyzing kind of the statements that we make. So here, when we say something like, I am focusing my attention on something, or my brain focuses the attention, we have to figure out what each term refers to. So something such as the term brain, we see that as kind of simple and obvious as the point might be, we derive all of our information about it in our experience, right? There's something we can see, something we can touch, probably not taste, hopefully, although that's a possibility, but something probably not hear, right? Smell, not so much, hopefully. So it's something we derive from our senses, and then we form a concept, an idea of it in what we would call our mind. So how do we then flip the causal chain around and say that aspect of our experience is what actually causes the experience and precedes it? You get what I'm saying?
So I come back. It's a really interesting question, and it's kind of, in a sense, a key question. But I come back over and over to this little bit of underlying logic that everything you think you know derives from information that came from the brain. So, for example, if I make a claim, I don't know, if I say there's an apple in front of me, and I believe that, and I think it, and I'm convinced there's an apple in front of me, that is not possible unless information about an apple is in my brain. Absent that information, I can't actually have those thoughts, beliefs, and claims. So it's almost like a conservation law, like the conservation of energy or something. This is conservation of information. Information can't come out of a brain unless it's in there. So I can't make claims or have beliefs unless the information's in there. And that means when I believe I have a mind, I have this conscious experience, I have these internal mental properties. By that principle, these things must derive from information in the brain. And we have begun to piece together, there's actually a huge area of research on how the brain constructs information about minds. It's called theory of mind. And we all have this very specialized machinery in the brain that evolved because we're very socially capable animals, that evolved, that allows us to do that, allows us to process that particular domain of information.
Right. So basically, when I'm looking at you, when you said you're looking at me, I'm looking at you. Really, of course, I'm just looking at a computer screen, right? I can
Yes.
touch it, it's flat, right? If I throw something, I get angry at you, I throw something, you throw something at me, we're not gonna hit each other. Benefit of video, right? But
Yep.
and then I have to attribute conscious states to you, right? I have
Yes,
to
exactly.
view your face as a sign for a conscious
Yes.
entity that is other than myself. And the same idea would then go with the apple. I'm taking the sight of the apple as a sign for further attributes of the apple, such as touch sensation, such as the potential
Yes.
flavor, taste based on my prior experiences. So the idea is all this can be understood by, if we want to call it philosophical analysis or simply by analytical analysis, whatever word we want to use. And the argument that I was making is that, let's say that I put my hand, we put our hand under hot water, right? Both of us would agree that that is an experience, correct?
Yeah, sure.
It's an experience. It's something that's contingent on my hand and my nerves and all these things. It's an
Yeah.
experience. Now I hear a symphony, right? A beautiful symphony. It's an experience. We can't really
Yes.
reduce it and say, here's the notes, right? Just let's separate it and we'll still have that experience, right?
Well, the thing is, we can't because it's too complicated, right? The parts there are too many parts. There's literally trillions of parts. There's the mind is a trillion stranded sculpture made out of information. And so nobody can track all that. But when you put your hand under the water and you believe, think, claim, insist, are certain you have an experience, none of those things are possible. The believing, the claiming, the insisting, none of it is possible, except that they all derive from information that is telling you what an experience is, that you are having it, and what particular experience is happening at that moment. And people are, neuroscientists are beginning to hone in on these specific brain circuits that compute information in that domain, right? There's circuits that compute visual information and tell us about visual objects, and circuits that compute auditory information. There's also circuits that compute information about mind states, experienceness. And when those circuits are damaged or gone, that concept is gone.
Right.
It's like irrelevant, becomes irrelevant to that entity.
Right. So, but I think that's precisely kind of the point we really want to delve into, right? So, right. So getting back, as we said, and you said, right, there's so many parts to a symphony, we can't break it down. But I also think, it seems to me that experientially speaking, let's take something like, I got a good grade in school, or I got a promotion, or something exciting happened. My favorite sports team won, in politics, right? This is a complicated experience that you can't break down, not only because of a secondary kind of analysis that it is objectively composed out of parts, but because directly it wouldn't be something if I broke it down. If I go and pick apart a complicated experience of a picnic in the park, it's not going to be a picnic in the park, right? If I pick apart something that it is what it is, it's not going to be that thing directly in my experience. So the point that I was making concerning the brain is that, again, as obvious as it may sound, any and all information that we can gain about the brain has to be thought of on the same epistemological footing as anything else altogether, right? If hot water is an experience, something I see is an experience, or we can toss the word experience, it can be thought of on the same footing of knowledge, right? So anything that I see in between the ears is on the same footing of knowledge as hot water, or as a symphony orchestra, or anything like that. Anything I can think about it is likewise the same kind of thing. So you see what I'm saying? That I think we can explore a little bit the question of whether, when we say the brain causes conscious states or any other cognitive processes, we're not putting the cart before the horse, so to speak. You get what I'm saying?
Yeah. Well, yes, I do see what you're saying. It is certainly a philosophical perspective that is out there that is shared by other people. And I definitely see what you're saying. But we know that manipulating specific signals in the brain changes the knowledge that is in that person. And we to some really super simple extent, because the science is young, to some super simple extent, we understand how to pump signal in this spot and add this piece of knowledge. Or we know that if someone has a stroke that damages that spot, certain kinds of knowledge disappear. And so in terms of the link between the brain and the knowledge that's up there in our minds, that's a pretty tight link, right? So as a neuroscientist, or as a scientist in general, I start with this basic concept that indeed the knowledge, the information, and so on that makes up our mind is essentially, it is a product of the brain. Of course, the brain interacting with a much larger environment. It's not like our brains are free floating, independent, in a vat kind of thing.
Right. So, and no, those are excellent points for sure. And I think that's the biggest kind of obstacle to any such view, is the fact that undoubtedly we see that we can modify conscious experience by modifications to whatever it is that is the brain, or that we call the brain. Right. I'm drinking coffee right now in hopes that it'll modify my conscious experience a little bit, make me a little sharper, a little bit more attentive. We wake up in the morning, we're groggy, we ate something from the stomach, it affects our experience. Obviously, drugs, medications, concussions, brain surgery, electrostimulation, all of these things. So I think here it is, it's a very sensible conclusion to say that that proves definitively that the brain causes these states. But I think we can maybe explore another approach here. And here we would refer back to how we find out about anything altogether, and its relationship to our knowledge. So when let's say that we're, we take a pen or a pencil and we write out a word, right? Let's say we write the word, what's a good word? Any word, we write the word love, right? We write the word love. Now, what is there? We see that it stands as a sign for this very, very complicated idea, right? But it's not the idea itself, right? We on the sand, on the beach, we scribble LOVE. Is what we mean by that word that? Of course not at all. It's just a sign for it. Just like, in fact, when I look at an apple, I don't see the apple, because the apple, I think, as we would agree, is what we would call a concept. Excuse me. Or as an idea. It stands as a visual sign for that idea and those further experiences. And yet, of course, if the waves come and they wash away the LOVE, that sign is gone and it no longer appears visible in that spatial and temporal position, right? So here, relating that to the brain, if we were to consider the information that we gain about the brain, such as through CAT scans, as the visibility of thought processes, I think that might explain why, if we mess with that visibility, we can modify conscious experience. We take out a part of the brain of what lights up when we're solving a math problem, and we may impede the solving of that math problem, right? We take out a part that lights up when we're listening to something verbal. It may impede our verbal comprehension. But to me, it seems that may no more prove that part caused that capacity than to erase love. It proves that those signs was love. You get what I'm saying? I'm not doing too good of a job explaining.
Yeah. No, I get what you're saying. I think personally the analogy is a bit strained, and I'll tell you why. For example, it's not just that a part of the brain seems to light up during some process, but in many cases, at least in simple cases where it is simple enough for scientists to study it in any detail, and much of the brain is a huge mystery and is way too complicated at this point for people to grasp. But some processes are simple enough that one can actually trace the specific computations that lead from input to this, to that, to this piece of information, to that piece of information. And for example, in the case of visual motion, really simple. You look at something and it moves, and you know it moves. How does that happen? The pathways from specific activations in the eye to specific computations that determine what direction and how fast it's moving, and whether it's moving smoothly or not, percolating up layer by layer. Essentially, the specific innards of the big biological computer has been worked out in enough detail that now one can go in and manipulate the specific elements and change the information that has been built by the brain, essentially. So it's a pretty darn specific level of computation, a pretty darn detailed level of comprehension for some processes in the brain. And that is, in a sense, a test case. It tells us, yeah, this is information that is being constructed by something. It's not a digital computer, vastly different from our desktop computers, but it's a thing that manipulates information. And that information then leads to beliefs and thoughts and the kinds of claims that we make about ourselves.
Yeah, no, I hear you, and I see. I think I see what you're saying. I hope I see what you're saying. But so what you just said, right? So we can trace the process of, for example, following a moving object. So let's try to again expose a statement like that to really critical kind of analysis and ask what is the direct content that we are interpreting so as to form that judgment that we can trace it. Literally, what is that direct content? Is it a CAT scan? Is it what is it?
Oh, well, one can put specific electrodes in a brain and measure the activity of an individual neuron. One can study how individual neurons work at such a detailed level that we know the way chemically they operate and send a signal from one end to the other. We can know how the synapse itself is a little essentially a logic gate that sends or doesn't send information on this and that circumstances. And we can construct the entire process from input to at least that particular piece of knowledge, which is this thing is moving in this direction. So the level of detail is pretty incredible. Not a CAT scan, or a PET scan, or one of these scans, which is a very low resolution, low level of detail. We're talking at such a level that one can, and people have built that tiny little piece of it. That tiny little piece of it. So when you get to the level of understanding it from an engineering point of view, it's a kind of a deeper level of comprehension of what's going on. It's looking under the hood.
Right, and I hear you, Professor. And again, it's absolutely, those are the correct statements to make. But what I'm trying to kind of the direction I'm trying to push is to really again analyze those statements phenomenologically, to so say. Right, meaning we understand observations are theory laden. We observe things in light of the paradigm, the schema that we have, and to really make philosophical progress, we have to really critically consider the direct content of experience, and then think about it and think about how we can think about it. So concerning the findings of the brain, the argument here would seem to be that again these are visibilities of thought processes. So for example, let's say that somebody is lying in a CAT scan, though, right, as you said, it's low resolution, but it still can give us some information. It still shows when the brain lights up, right? Right. Yeah. So somebody lying in a CAT scan, and they're being read a story, let's say Hansel and Gretel, right? An English story, whatever the case may be, in a very monotone, smooth, consistent tone of voice. And then all of a sudden, in the middle of that story, a math equation, a math question is asked, for example, what is 2 + 2, right? So correct me if I'm wrong, but a different area of the brain would light up once the person has heard and processed that math problem, right?
Probably, yes, you're right.
Right. So on a model of the brain that is more mechanistic and that says that it causes that comprehension, what exactly would be the idea here, right? That everything is read in a monotone tone of voice. It's not like it was different sound particles or something like that. So the idea was to demonstrate the concept we're talking about. First, the person understands what it is that is being said, and then the brain lights up if it's being looked at. It demonstrates that. So, for example, first of all, I'm in class, all right? Let's say you're in class. I want to raise my hand. So that idea, I want to convey some notion. I have something to say. I have a question to ask, and then I show a sign for it. If you're looking, you're going to see that, and you're going to imply, oh, this student wants to ask a question. If you don't see it, you don't see it. So the idea would be that it's the same thing. That the lighting up of the brain is a sign for processes that are going on in our mind, in our thought life. If we look at them, we see them, and if we don't, we don't. But I think that's a point we can explore. So how would, under a model where the brain is the one that is manufacturing the understanding, what would be going on in that situation with the story and the math problem?
Right. So, for example, in your example of writing love on the beach in the sand and then it washes away, but love is still there, just the signifier is gone. I think that's a good example. So when a part of the brain is damaged, i.e. washed away, you don't just get the signifier that's gone. The whole thought and concept is gone from that person, right? So just to give you an example, one of the weirdest and actually quite awful syndromes that occurs to people with stroke, you have damage to a part of the brain that interests me in particular. And that's on the right side, a little above the ear. It's called the temporoparietal junction, but whatever it's called, it's part of the brain that has widespread connections. And damage to it can lead to essentially erasing people's concept of the left side of space. Right? Now, understand, it's not that they no longer see it. Actually, they do see it. I mean, they can respond without realizing they're responding. They can respond in unconscious ways to visual images over here. They see it, they process it, but they no longer understand that there is such a thing as the left side of space. They'll eat all the food on one side of their plate and be convinced they're done. Wow. And then if you rotate the plate, they don't know where the heck that extra food came from. They can't conceive of it. And they dress one side of their body. If they draw a clock, they cram all the numbers in one side of a hemicircle because they know what the numbers are, but they can't anymore comprehend what that other side was. So there's this weird link where the damage to the brain is not taking out a signifier, it's taking out whole concepts. It's actually removing knowledge, fundamental knowledge. And so this is a concept that dates back quite a long way. Some people would say to Hippocrates, who first noticed that specific brain damage kind of took out chunks of people's minds. And that, of course, has been studied in much greater specificity over the years. So that's that's one of the sort of cornerstones of neuroscience, linking brain with mind.
Right. No, and that's incredibly interesting how we can, like you said, by tragically a disease or injury or something like this, how a person's entire reality can absolutely change. And we see. Have you heard of a fellow named Clive Warring with the 5-second memory or something like this?
Oh, right. Yes, there are people who have all kinds of horrific memory deficits. So one of the most famous ones is so-called patient HM, who his surgeons took out a part of his brain because it was generating epileptic seizures. And at that time, nobody knew what that part of the brain did. And after, he was the first and only patient where that surgery was done, because from then on, he could never store new memories. He could only remember things, as you put it, a 5-second memory, but he had short-term memory. And right. Then after a few minutes, if he got distracted, it was gone. And he thought he was 20 and for the rest of his life. And he
That's
never
not bad.
learned his, it's true, he never learned
Yeah.
his doctor's name. You walk out the room and walk in again, and he thinks you're meeting for the
Right.
first time.
Right. Yeah.
So,
Yeah, no,
yeah,
I don't know if the guy that I mentioned is still alive, but it's basically the same thing. You can see the videos. His wife walks in, hey, honey, she walks out again. Hey, honey, again and again. Right. But so it's
yep,
obviously we would correlate that the modifications of the brain. But I think here an argument can be made, right? So let's say we take a 5-minute span of our conscious experience. Say I wake up, I'm groggy. I have no idea where I am, what's going on. All of a sudden, oh, I'm right here. This is what I have to do. Maybe drink some coffee or tea, whatever a person prefers. Now I feel attentive and alert. Now I'm trying to remember something, but I forgot. It's right there on the tip of my tongue, but I can't remember it. Now I do remember it. Now I have a conversation. I'm stumbling over my words. I can barely tie them together. Now I get myself in order. I have a great conversation. Right. So we see this all can occur, maybe not all that, not within 5 minutes, 10 minutes, whatever the case may be, but that can occur within a relatively short span of conscious experience. And yet I think we would do well to pause before identifying oneself with any of these conscious states and saying that I am the grogginess that I feel when I wake up, or I am the lack of memory, or that I am the alertness once I try to go to your feet. Right. I think we can
true.
directly experience that I'm here physically, but I'm something other than that. And this is coming to me. Now, without a doubt, we can modify the experiences that come to us by messing with the brain in one way or another. But just like we can modify our conscious experience by putting our hand under cold water or pinching ourselves, right? Or anything else like that, right? We can have a few drinks and we can forget, or maybe not our name, but somebody else's name, right? We can have, again, various medications, all these narcotics, and have crazy hallucinations and all kinds of things, but it's not me, right? It's things that are coming to me. Or I think that's a distinction that can be made.
I see.
You see what I'm
Well,
saying?
yeah, I would agree that you are a totality of many, many different things. You are not just a poor memory at one moment in time, or a good memory at another moment, or whatever it is. You are not these little individual pieces. You are a totality, but you are a totality of components. And in the case of the brain damage, those things go away. I mean, to some extent, you can relearn them, but in some cases you can't. They're gone forever. It's a bit like when you think of yourself as a physical entity, as a body, you're a totality. If you get an arm amputated, that's gone. I mean, you're still there, you're still a person, but that piece of you is gone. And this is something we see with the brain and with brain damage, not these temporary, something's not quite working in the circuitry and you have to drink your coffee to wake up, but it's gone. Like those pieces of your mind go, even to the extent that if you have damage to certain networks, certain chunks, especially the so-called parieto-frontal networks, I'm throwing words out here, but just for specificity, really extensive damage, you can have people who are just, I mean, vegetative, basically. They're done. They're unable to be in any sense that anyone can tell responsive or interactive or understand what's going on around them. So yeah, you can, that can go all the way to the extreme.
To the extreme, including brain death. But here, to the last point, I think there's a really subtle kind of nuance that we may want to pay attention to, and that is that I only exist directly from my own first person point of view. As we mentioned towards the beginning, everybody else that I see from each possible point of view, from that point of view, from this point of view, from every possible point of view, everybody else that I see comes across to me as an object, but I experience myself as a subject, to use words like that. Right. So when I say that it is possible to knock somebody out, or it's possible to put somebody under anesthesia and have them be unconscious, or as you said, it's possible for somebody to be in a comatose state or brain dead or something like this. When I say these things, it's me simply imagining objects, bodies, but directly I can only have experience. I can only be whatever it is that I am, right? And I think another interpretation then would be that there's no absolute or universal time within which all conscious experiences are occurring. And that would seemingly, I don't say explain, but that could be a suggestion as to how it is possible for me to go under the knife when I'm having surgery, and yet, as per my faith in other conscious experiences, that the surgeon would remain. You get what I'm saying?
Right. So there are certain possibilities, let's call them, that logically cannot be ruled out, and they may be the case. And many people have thought about these possibilities. I could state, for example, some people say the universe is a simulation. That's a really good example of a theory, if you will, that is might be true, might not be true. There's zero evidence one way or the other, and probably can never be. And one cannot find a logical flaw that rules it out or rules it in. It could be true. Another one is the famous example of the brain in a vat. We could be brains if you decide that you're going to go with brains are the source of all our minds. What if our brains are just floating in vats and some buddy has stuck electrodes in them and is putting signals in, and that's why we think we're here in this world, and none of it's really real. So there are these possibilities, you could call them, that are not logically rule outable. But what happens is, at least as a pragmatist and a scientist, I say to myself, I'm going to start with certain assumptions, and they are assumptions, right? So one of those assumptions is no, reality is what it is. There really is a real world out there. Another assumption is, yeah, there really is time, at least as physicists understand it. And these kinds of very basic assumptions that undergird it, empirical science, like neuroscience, then lead me to this position that the brain is the basis for the mind. Now, you can come along and say, well, but wait a minute, all I know is experience, and all of science and all of the external world is, as far as I'm concerned, just experience inside of me. So I don't technically know that any of those scientific assumptions are airtight. They're not airtight. There's always assumptions. You always start with some ground level of assumptions. So I certainly acknowledge that there's things that, maybe I'm completely wrong about all this, but I do start with a certain ground level of scientific assumption. And that is, that plugs into the empirical research, that plugs into the neuroscience research. And it's from there that one gets this whole structured way of thinking. The brain causes the mind. The brain causes it in the specific scientific sense of causal, namely, poke the brain and it changes the mind, damage the brain and it erases a part of the mind.
Right. No, that's very well said, and absolutely right. But I would say, as you yourself made the distinction, that there is a difference between making statements within a given paradigm and structure that are correct vis-a-vis that structure or paradigm, right? For example, within the context of chess or checkers or tennis, or a video game, right? The rules of the video game, and extrapolating from there to making philosophical, want to call metaphysical or ontological, whatever word we want to use, assumptions. Right. So here, I think everything that we're saying on your end is absolutely, it's correct insofar as it is correct within those paradigms and frameworks. But what I'm trying to get at is that we can at least try to step out of those paradigms a little bit and consider directly the ways that it is possible to think about experience and to think about the ways that we think. So here, concerning, you said the brain might be in a vat, we might be in a simulation. So again, if we're gonna stick to kind of solid thinking and say that everything can be thought of on the same footing of knowledge, that we're not going to say that there's a qualitative difference between hot water and something I see and something I hear and something I think. We're going to think of it all in the same way, whatever way we want to use. Then we wouldn't, again, create these fantasies that I have a brain and it's in a vat, or that there's a simulation. We're in a simulation. What I know is that I exist. And within my existence, I don't even want to call it consciousness necessarily, because that's implying that it's a single item out of many items. There's consciousness, there's unconsciousness, there's a house, there's a tree, there's a computer, right? Well, there's existence. Within existence, there are certain variations and modifications of experience. Out of these modifications, I can construct a model of an idea, just like, let's say, a world economy, a nation. You can't see a nation, right? Where do we go see the United States? We can't look at a sidewalk. We can't look at a building in DC. It's a concept, right? It's what we would call an idea. We can't see the world banking system, right? But we would say those things exist. We can't see a relationship with another person, but we would say those things exist. So I can build up a concept and an idea of something that is correlated with my conscious experience. And we can call that the brain. But this idea is to be thought of on the same footing as anything else. It exists in me. And the signs for this idea, whatever we would see in a CAT scan or otherwise, hopefully not in the flesh, right? Hopefully just in a CAT scan, as the brain surgeon. And the signs for this idea exist in the same way as the signs for any other idea, which is a matter of my experience. You get what I'm saying? So again, I understand within the paradigm, a particular paradigm, we have certain statements that we need to make concerning causation and neurology and all those things. But if we step outside of that and we consider directly what we have, I think that might be a way to phrase it. What do you think?
Yeah, I feel you. I feel you. But I would say, I would go back to something I said at the very beginning, that there is a world of study, of scholarship, that is very philosophical and has been around for a very long time, and people have thought and rethought and reconsidered ideas very much like you're talking about. And I certainly don't mean to dump on it or denigrate it, because it's very interesting and very important. But it's not going to build you technology. And so my particular take on this whole question of consciousness, mind, and so on, and brain is, what do we need to know? What within the paradigm or with the baseline assumptions necessary that we're going to build technology, we're going to understand it at an engineering level. What do we need to do? What do we need to know? And so when you say, let's step back and think in this other philosophical way, that's great. That's, wonderful. People have to do that. People have to continue doing that. But it's actually not going to help me with the engineering and technological side. So that's where I come in. That's where my work in this whole topic of consciousness is so different from the main body of work that has been going on. The main body of work is this much more philosophical, much more, let's step back, let's think in the abstract, let's understand what knowledge and experience, what can we say about that at all that we're sure is true, as opposed to basing it on assumptions that creep in. I mean, that's wonderful, that kind of philosophy. My approach has been, let's be engineers and build stuff. And so I have to come in with a whole set of physical, yes, a whole set of assumptions, a whole set of paradigms. So sure, I feel you. I get what you're saying. It's a little bit outside the line that I follow.
No, and I feel as well. I hear what you're saying, and I think it's undoubtedly imperative, and that is what we need, especially at this time, to make the technological strides, and whatever gains that we can make by the study of our cognitive systems are tremendous. They're invaluable, right? So I think there's beyond room for that. That's phenomenal, right? But I think that at the same time, we can't help but draw certain broader philosophical conclusions from our technical work. And that is what a certain line of thinking inevitably leads to, right? And that leads to the view that ultimately I can say that as opposed to being a subject, as opposed to being a self, with all the concomitants of that burden or that gift, whatever you want to call it, I am nothing more than this term, a brain, right? And I can be reduced to it. I arise from it, and I can be brought back to it, or at most maybe an epiphenomenon of it, whatever the case may be. And that is a radically different world paradigm than the one which would put me as subject. And obviously me, I mean any self, not this particular self, any self as subject. That would put the self as subject, as we said, with all of the associated consequences of that. So
Sure.
I think we have to be careful not to deny anything when we're talking, as we were before, philosophically. We're not denying anything. We're not saying anything is not true or anything like that. We're trying to clarify the assumptions that we can draw from our technical work and from our efforts to make technological progress.
Yeah.
You get what I'm saying?
I would say, yeah, sure. I mean, just to clarify my position, I do think people are big biological machines. And I do think that our subjectivity is not a brain, it's information. Like I said, it's like a sculpture made out of information. That's what the mind is, a giant multi-stranded sculpture that's constantly shifting and changing. I do think that's what we are. And I think that we ultimately will be able to construct machines that think they're conscious in the same way that people think they're conscious. And admittedly, that all lives within a certain set of assumptions about the world and how the world works. And one can step outside that set of assumptions and take a different philosophical perspective. But I do sense that there is a difference in perspective between us on what people are and what the mind is. I do see, I would object though to the word only or reducing, like a person is only this or only a brain or only reduced to that, because I don't see it as a reduction. I see it as almost the opposite. That is the neuroscientific knowledge we have about the brain and mind suggests something so radically more complicated and elaborate than anyone had envisioned in the past, that rather than reducing someone to something simpler, I see it almost as elevating people to something more remarkable.
Yeah, no, I hear you. And it is absolutely a compelling vision, and one that we need to carefully explore. But I would say that I think here the difference might be in terminology, right? If we can clearly clarify some or another notion, that is what it is. It would be how we speak about it and the conclusions that we derive from it, right? So I think if we can clarify something aside from merely terminology, then that would be very useful. For example, obviously there's there's a traditional problem, right? Body, mind, material, spirit, something like this. But these are terms. If we can get past the terms and think about what is there directly, right? So speaking a point you brought up about not devaluing the human being and the self by this kind of view, I think we can perhaps say that the value of a person lies in our capacity to attain to something worth attaining, to conceiving of some kind of good that is an end in itself, right? We're driving to the beach to write the LOV into the sand. That's just the means to an end. We don't want to keep driving, right? You drive to the beach, drive forever, 10 years, right? We would say, no, I want to be at the beach ASAP. I'm just driving because I have to get there. So the idea would be that all of our contingent desires are in reference to deeper and deeper desires, right? If I start with any contingent desire, I really want to make it to the concert this weekend. Why do you want to do it? Well, I want to feel good. Why does this make you feel good? Well, because this may, right? So we push and push, and eventually logic suggests that we reach a fundamental desire or impetus or drive to somehow satisfy ourself or nature. And that would be what we call good, right? The term good refers to that. And that would be where our value comes from, that we can attain to an end as opposed to only a means, as opposed to only being an instrument. We can be an end in and of its own self, right? Now, everything that we call an object in our experience is only and ever a means. I'm drinking again that coffee as a means. I'm not going to put it into my room, read to it, talk to it. That would make me nuts, right? Because it's just that it's an instrument. Drink it, throw it into the trash. My cell phone is a means, right? The computer is a means. We're using things to accomplish something else. But our value as individuals, I think an argument can be made, comes from that we can attain to the end. So if we say that, however we would phrase it, whether I'm synonymous with, or I'm an epiphenomenon of, or I'm in connection with information that arises due to the neurological processes, however we would phrase it, if ultimately I want to equate myself as a self with some or another object of my experience, whether it's something I can touch now or see in a CAT scan or whatever the case may be, I do think that precludes any possibility of the value of human life.
Why though?
Well, because of what we just discussed.
But why can't you aspire to goodness and decency and love, even if you are a product of this incredible, wonderful, vast biological machine that is the engine of those desires and the engine of the whole concept of love? Why not? I mean, why?
So if I say, right, we have fingernails and we have hair, right? Not all of us, but some of us have hair, some of us have beard. Thankfully, you and I do. But we have all these body parts. If I said, as a matter of fact, that I am my fingernails, and then I said, but why can't I still aspire to high ideals and love and justice and peace and truth and goodness? I am my fingernails, but so what? If there is a so what, right? So if I eat a candy, right, and I'm done with it, and I have a wrapper, I'm thinking, what is this? In reality, not just how I feel about it, or what is this? It's a wrapper. It's garbage. Let me throw it into the trash. If, again, just like the coffee, if I were to put it into my room and read bedtime stories to it, that would make me nuts. That doesn't seem to occur on occasion, right? Somebody thinks a stone, right, a pet rock, whatever. Little kids, obviously stuffed animals, that's fine for them. But if an adult takes a candy wrapper and falls in love with it, that's called being cuckoo, right? So if I do, as a matter of fact, claim that I and everybody else that I call a person is on the same existential, put it like that, footing as a candy wrapper or as a stone, it would make me nuts to then say, oh, but I should still care about love and goodness and justice. That's it. There's an incongruence here, as I see it. But I'd love to hear your opinion.
Yeah. Well, I mean, certainly, if you are pointing only to your fingernails, I mean, of course, I like my fingernails and I don't want them gone or ripped out. I actually do care about them. Right. But I acknowledge that they are in some sense relatively trivial components of the larger thing. I'm much more attached to other parts of myself. But yeah, I do think that I am a component. I am a collection of components. I am a hugely interacting, complicated collection of components, and I don't see how that changes my desire for goodness and decency and love and so on. So, for example, I'll just give this one example, and maybe in some sense we're talking past each other. I'm not sure, but scientifically, Isaac Newton figured out that the thing we call white is a combination of all colors and isn't just pure brightness stripped clean of all contaminants. And so now every educated person walks around with two simultaneous concepts, totally incompatible with each other. And one is a scientific truth, and the other is an aesthetic truth. And we're completely happy with both of those. And the fact that white is a mixture of all colors doesn't change the way we think about white aesthetically. We still kind of think of it as like the clean whitewash kind of color, the simpler kind of color, and so on. We think of white aesthetically in a certain way, and we do that. But frankly, to go back to the things I've been talking about, we do that. We know that the evolution built into our visual systems simplifying tricks for processing wavelengths, and that seems related to our aesthetic of white. But my point though is that we're perfectly happy with these two. As people, we walk around with two incompatible concepts, and we're perfectly happy with it. And one's the aesthetic side, and one's the scientific sort of fact-based mechanistic side. And that's perhaps contradictory, but I'm happy with that. I'm happy to be a collection of components, and at the same time aspire to human decency and ethics and goodness and so on.
Yeah, no, that's a great analogy. Absolutely, and it would seem to be relevant, but I would say that nonetheless, ultimately, we may hold out even as a tenet of faith that reality has no contradictions. There are not contradictions ultimately in anything at all, and ultimately we do have to find a way to kind of eliminate these contradictions. So here is a concern, say the color white. I think this would relate to the question of how seriously we need to take the position of scientific realism, right? That all of the entities that are indicated by terms that are commonly used, that they exist in a literal way. This is certainly a question. We don't want to give any easy answers, but it's a question. It's not every informed individual has agreed or continues to agree that even terms such as atoms have literal concomitants, right? So here, white would be an experience, a direct, irreducible experience. The experience itself is certainly irreducible insofar as it is so irreducible. I see something white, I see something white. That's a direct experience. However, we can build a model of the world. We can form a world image. We can quantify it, and we can extrapolate certain conclusions from that world image, and then we can suppose some of those conclusions to causally account for some of our experiences, such as for white, or referring to what we're talking about, such as the brain and matter and so forth. But these are metaphysical, quote unquote, positions. They're just implicit nowadays. We make certain metaphysical positions in our scientific work, in our studies, and then we never think to question them, but they can be questioned. And as he said, right, we said, don't question them or at least you're focusing on technology, and that's phenomenal. To make progress within a given paradigm, it's imperative. We make certain assumptions and we move ahead, and we see how we've transformed the world based on certain assumptions. Absolutely. Airplanes and phones and computers and quantum computers. It's unbelievable. It's miraculous, right? And yet we have to remember, we don't know at any significant level how any of this works, right? We don't know.
It could be.
Right. And further, least of all, can we draw conclusions for what we are as a self, and what the purpose or lack thereof of life is, and so forth and so on, right? So just like a person can make tremendous progress in computer programming, but they wouldn't then say, oh, but that I know from that what everything is, right? A person can be a blacksmith and can master the art of forging and metal and all of this, and yet that wouldn't give them the authority to speak as to the fundamental constitution of what we would call physical reality. So here we can form a paradigm such as subsist in modern day physics and in neurology and so forth, and we can make tremendous progress there, and all that progress is phenomenal, and we love it, and it's super useful. But we're not going to jump from there. Maybe we should pause before jumping from there and saying that, and this is how the world is in an absolute sense, or this is what I am, right? You get what I'm saying?
Mm-hmm. You're sure. I mean, I certainly wouldn't go from the particular to the general. So I don't think the blacksmith can claim to understand metal and how to shape it.
How to shape functionally, right? Not on any deeper level than that.
Now, as I said at the very beginning, my job is to figure out how to engineer this stuff, how to, within that paradigm, as you put it, within that framework, within that set of assumptions about science and neurology and the brain. And as you put it, we create a model for how a brain can account for mind states. Well, within that model, my job is to figure out how to engineer it, how to build technology, how to at least point the way toward the technology. That's what I do. So how to build things that have knowledge, how to build things that think in the sense of construct information structures, construct their own knowledge, and how to build things that within their knowledge structure, they contain the information that they are an entity and that they have experience, how to build the machine that has those properties. That's what I do. That's what I do. Now we can have this long discussion, which is very, I mean, it's a wonderful discussion. And it certainly harks back to the kind of discussions that go on in that field of philosophy of mind in general. But I have certainly decided that rather than go in that direction, which in my view doesn't lead to specific concrete scientific or technical advancement, it tends to be a really interesting, profound, fundamental discussion that in some ways goes in circles, my view. My job is to move the other direction, to say, what can we apply, build, engineer? And so that's a big difference, I guess.
That's right. Absolutely right. And as we said, right, that's imperative, and that we credit so much of our modern day life that we love exactly that kind of work, and kind of I hope that you continue with it and are as successful as possible for everybody's sake, right? But again, I still think that inevitably certain, going back to the point we made, is inevitably certain broader conclusions are drawn. And what I'm saying is that we should maybe pause and examine ourselves before we make that leap to those broader conclusions. For example, it's a huge paradigm shift to say that computers will ever be conscious or will ever be persons. That's a very different world we're going to live in if we say that.
Yes.
And it's kind of right. And it's a little bit not that entirely, what's the word? It's not given the whole picture. If we say, oh, but this is just within a paradigm to make progress, right? That's already getting philosophical. That's already, right. That's already talking, right. And the same thing with saying that we're big biological machines. So that's what I think we should really carefully examine.
Sure, yeah. Although I do think those things, but you're right. One should carefully examine it. And one of the things I've written about and thought about quite a bit actually is the impact on us as human beings, as a society, of having machines that walk around and are conscious as far as anyone can tell in any sense at all. As you know, like C-3POs walking around, talking and interacting and showing the same kinds of thinking process and emotions as people. What will that do to us? How will that change us? And I'm not convinced. I mean, it's going to be a gigantic change. It's going to reshape our society. It's going to happen. It's already beginning to happen, and you know, it's not going to be 100% a good thing. There's going to be a lot of ethical gray zone in there for sure. So that's something that's of great interest to me.
Right, right. And I'm sorry.
Yeah, I was going to say, but it's going to happen, whether we like it or not. The world is moving that way at shocking speed.
That machines will be conscious.
Yes, that machines will be conscious in the sense of they will think they are conscious, and they will compute in the same ways that we see people computing, and they will speak in the ways people speak, and they will act and make decisions in the same ways that people do. Yes.
Like Bicentennial Man, right? That movie?
Yes, sure.
Right.
Like that. Yes, exactly.
Right.
We're moving there. We're moving there faster than people realize.
Right, right. So that I think that's a great point, and also that's what we're talking about here. So I think we can absolutely make the argument that there will come a day when computers are even more advanced than they are now. That's almost tautological, however you pronounce it. At the rate we're moving, right, that we're going to be able to have very realistic conversations. But that's all soft questions to so say. The hard question here is, will it ever be logically sound to say that machines are conscious? And if the answer is yes, that's a completely different existence that we find ourselves in than if the answer is no.
Yeah.
So let's examine that briefly. So the argument we were making prior is that there's a subject and there's an object. Everything that is an object can be thought of on the same footing of understanding, of knowledge as anything else. And none of it is what we would call conscious. Not my fingernail, not my hand, not my ear, not any object that I see. So quote unquote consciousness, again, we have this visualization. There's a vapor and it's connected to the brain, or there's this something like that. Let's get rid of that word. Again, there's myself as subject. I know I exist, for whatever that's worth. If even probably that's an understatement. I just exist. What can I say? And then there's objects. Some of these objects are animated. Some of these objects move. Some of these objects don't move. I have to interpret these objects and think about what they stand for. If I see an object that is composed of the same material as is this object, I attribute mind to it. I take it to stand for the same existence that I myself experience, right? Why? Because I can correlate myself, my self-knowledge, my self-existence with this object and being constituted as it is, heartbeat, hopefully, all these kinds of things. Now, if I find those signs in another object and I believe that I'm not hallucinating, I'm not dreaming, I haven't taken the bath salts or whatever, I really think this is reality, I say, okay, this is an object that indicates basically myself. I'm looking at myself in the mirror. It's a different face. It's a different, it's different cognitive attributes and a different cognitive history, memories, all this. But as self, it's myself. Just like looking in the mirror. I look in the mirror, I don't see myself. I see a body. I see an image that indicates myself, which I can only know about from my first person point of view. So say, you get what I'm saying? So no amount, nothing that any object can do can ever convince me that it's conscious, because it's not. The object is not conscious. All right, none of it is conscious. So it indicates the consciousness, to use that word, which I think we should have used, that I myself am experiencing. You get what I'm saying?
So I can, I believe that in relatively short order, I don't know how many years, let's put it at an outside 100 years, it will be possible to build intelligent machines such that the machine to you will be just as conscious as I am to you.
So you're not conscious to me. This is an image on a screen.
Right, I understand. I understand exactly what you're saying. So that is the claim. Now, there is another layer on that where you can say, well, none of these people around me are conscious any more than this machine or than this thing or the people I know that are in my life. None of them, they're just objects. The only thing that is conscious in some more fundamental sense is me. And maybe I'm not even conscious. Maybe that's my own attribution stuck on it, but I'm, as you put it, I'm here, I exist. That you feel confident about. But what I'm saying is my goal or task essentially is to understand how to engineer a machine such that it is as conscious to me as another person is to me.
That it indicates.
And the inner workings of it, the computational workings inside of it, are such that they also match the computational workings that have been studied and confirmed in these other people. right? So this is the level at which I'm working. Now you're talking about this other philosophical level on top of that that says, great, but all of that is external object. And sure, you build a machine that is a good simulation of this other person, but neither machine nor other person is the same thing as me as person. Sure, I absolutely buy that. That's just not the level at which I'm working.
Right, no,
But I buy it. I buy it.
Right. And again,
I
I
get
think
it.
the level, right. I think that the level you're working on, again, as we said, it's imperative. It's phenomenal. But just to clarify a little bit more, these dynamics. So we wouldn't be pushing just some kind of naive solipsism, right? I exist. What is the world, right? I was born on a certain date, and I expect to die on a
How do
certain
you
date.
know? Sorry,
Well,
if you're arguing the position you're arguing, how do you know any of that? I mean, once you start assuming that there's this external reality, then you start getting more into the set of assumptions that on which science is built.
right. Well, again, right. So we would say that there is ultimately no contradiction. Strictly speaking, we may perhaps say that there is, quote unquote, the current moment, which is not clear either. Where is the present? Is it ontologically there, meaning by the way of myself as a subject, I am present and things come into my view, or is there a temporal, spatial present by the way of sensation? It's a difficult question. I'm not personally aware of a good enough answer here, but the way that reasoning works is that we implicitly suppose there to be causes to present experience. So if I see a house, I understand the correct statement to make is somebody built this house, and this would apply even in a dream. If I dream of a house, I'm dreaming of something that somebody built. That is part and parcel of the definition of a house. If it's not something that somebody built, it's not a house. I don't know what it would be. All right. So when I think of myself, part and parcel of the definition of a particular person, a particular body is a body that was born small and that grew and developed. So that is the concept of a person. So that the kind of solipsism that we definitely want to nullify is to identify oneself with this concept and say that's all that exists. Me as a particular individual with my vanity and my selfishness and my desires. That's all that there is. That's called narcissism, or that's called superegoism, or something like this. So here we're saying something else. We're saying that no, myself as subject is not synonymous with this body. It's not synonymous with any of my particular mental states, and nobody else's body is either. I can only self-experience myself as a subject. I can then correlate it with particular modifications of objects, again, hand movement, blank, whatever the case may be. And then I can do the same by the way of other objects that I see. So it's not a personal I that we're talking about here, right? When you're saying, I don't know if anybody else, it's not a personal I. Right? It's not a particular super individuated sense of self. It's just what there is, right? And then again, objects come to me, but not the personal me in experience, right? And then I analyze them. Is a house something that somebody built? A person, myself in the mirror, something that a reflection of myself, and so forth and so on. So here it is. I think on a philosophical level, there's no amount of complexity and no amount of motion that would ever say this robot is conscious, because an object can never be conscious, and that goes by the way of biological objects. You get what I'm saying?
So your friends are no more conscious than that robot to you.
No. But no. So what I'm saying is, my friends to me are bodies, are images, right? There's concerts now with maybe before Corona, there was concerts, probably hopefully will be soon, with what do they call it? Holographic artists, right? Tupac, Biggie Small, guys like that, right? And ladies. And you see an image, and if you didn't know any better, somebody shows up, they don't know that such and such, Michael Jackson, let's say, such and such performer passed away. I would say that's a real person, moving, talking, walking. I can come up to them, I can shake their hand. Little do they know it's a hologram, right? So the image that we see is always just an image. Again, this is without any metaphysical implications, nothing like that, some nonsense simulation. We're not saying that at all. We're just strictly analyzing experience. It happens to be an image. Now that image must stand for some or another idea, right? Again, I see an image of I go to a modern art museum. I see an image of a spoon. It says, touch me. I touch it. My hand goes right through because there's just an image. A spoon is not that image. A spoon is something solid that I can eat, but the image stood as a sign for the spoon. So when I see other people, you right now on the screen, any people in real life, I see signs for what? For myself. It's not that they are not conscious. There's signs for myself, whatever that would be, but not my personal self, not my ego. They're not signs for my ego. Again, that's called narcissism and selfishness. There's signs for the wider sense of self, or whatever, however we would phrase it. You know what I'm saying?
Sort of. I mean, yeah, you have an interesting perspective, and it's yeah, sure. It is, like I said, it's a little different from the direction I go. I'm much more focused on the pragmatics of how to build stuff.
Right. I think that's as we said, that's absolutely imperative, and we should push as hard as we can in that direction. But at the same time, being careful about the broader implications we draw, and I think that's what this line of thought would be in support of, right? So we can say we can and should and hopefully will create the most advanced robots imaginable, and that'll totally transform the economic, the social landscape of the world, to have jobs for better, for worse, that now only people can do, robots can do, all these kinds of things. But that still is a very different thing than to say, but robots will be conscious, right?
Well, what if I built a robot? What if I built a conscious entity by mating and producing an offspring, and it grew up? I mean, it's still being built. It's being constructed through a whole set of biochemical processes, and then it results in a thing, which, I think, in the perspective you're describing, is an image or an object, and I attribute consciousness to it, and it has certain internal, we think, some kind of internal processes that give it the external behavior it has, which allows me to attribute a state of consciousness to it. So I see the robots as being very similar to that eventually. I mean, we're still talking about some distant future, but yeah.
I see where you're saying, right? So a baby can be born and can become conscious, and a robot can be born and can become conscious. Right. So here, that's a great point. But I would again caution that when we use consciousness in this term, in this connotation, we're probably imagining something like a cloud of vapor that's associated with each individual body, or just the word consciousness that's associated with this baby and that baby and that baby. If we pay attention directly to experience, it seems to me that we can simply say that there is existence, which is not a priori individuated. And in fact, we see from studies of babies that there's no particular sense of individuated self at the beginning, as it would appear. There's no distinction between subject and object and saying, this is me, this is not me. And then we form these notions of the world and of ourself with time and with the development of the mind, right? So if we were to, again, think clearly and not imagine a vapor or something, I guess, not imagine that there's a personal consciousness associated somehow with each organ, something like this, and we simply pay attention, there's existence, there's what there is. I can experience myself as a self, as being, and then I can draw certain conclusions. I can relate it to present experiences, processes, as we said. I'm going to repeat it too many times, as you say, and I can also extrapolate from that and suppose that such and such image indicates it would be myself. That's the thing. When I say we're attributing consciousness, or when we say attributing consciousness, I think that can be a little bit tricky, because again, we're thinking, okay, there's consciousness, there's like an additional object to, or additional entity or quality or epiphenomenon that is to be attributed to this particular body. So here we would say, no, the only way to attribute consciousness, quote unquote, is if I see myself in you. Right? And we would say that's the root of human development. First, I only see myself in my body and in my narrow psychological personality, but I want to expand my sense of self. I want to see myself in others, in my family first, in my friends and my community members, and then hopefully in everybody. I see myself in another. It's not that I'm then thinking, okay, they're conscious, they're not conscious, there's a vapor, there's not. I see myself in another person, and that's how I love another person. So I connect with another person. If I think of another person as just an object, it's just a utility, it's just a candy wrapper, or it's just a computer or something like this.
Yep. I mean, yeah, I get your point of view for sure.
Yes, sir. Anything to add, Professor?
I don't know. I mean, we've kind of honed in on a really interesting set of questions. I think it was a good discussion, I think.
I think so, Professor. I think so. But yeah, I mean, I'm whenever you need to go, I'm ready to. I don't want to keep you waiting, but if we could just summarize for ourselves and for any listeners where we're at concerning that postulated relation between what we call brain and self.
Right.
Going all the way perhaps back to the beginning, if we are to think consistently and to say that all the content of experience can be thought of on the same footing of knowledge, it would certainly.
Well, that's your perspective. That's not really a summary. That's your perspective. My perspective is that we are actually the product of the brain, and your perspective is this other one. And that's absolutely right. That's a good summary of your perspective.
Yeah, but again, if I'm not saying I'm not negating anything. I'm not saying we're not a product of the brain, right? Just trying to clarify the content here that the words would stand for. If we grant that certain experiences of ours are experiences of ours, where do we draw the line and say that something is not an experience of ours, but actually causes us, right? If I take a pencil and push it into my hand and I feel pain, everybody would say, that's your experience. Now I reduce the pressure a little bit. I feel a little bit less pain. Still my experience. Now I just touch it without feeling pain. Still my experience, right? So that however we would find out about the brain, we would have to consider it to be a part of our experience. Again, I think Whitehead said this, that we think about the world on objectivist principles, as objectively, and about ourselves about the world on subjectivist principles, and about ourselves on objectivist principles, right? We say that the nerves and the brain are totally literal and real, but they exist in a totally dark world, right? That we simulate the external world in our mind. So we're saying, let's think of everything on the same footing for the sake of simplicity and consistency. And then we assemble the notion of the brain. It comes to us in our experience. And then it does seem to rule out a position that would state that either the term brain or any sense content that would be indicated by that term, or the idea indicated by that term, can cause, we didn't even get to discussing cause, but fine, we'll use that word, can cause ourself as a subject, albeit that it is certainly correlated with our experiences, undoubtedly. Would that be something that we can both get behind?
I mean, yeah, it still sounds like a good summary of your position. I would have to think more about it, but yeah.
Yeah. Gotcha. All right, Professor. Well, I really appreciate you coming on. And
yeah, sure. Thank you for having me.
Absolutely. You're doing incredibly interesting work. And as we talked about, I hope that you do make tremendous strides in technology and in our understanding of machines, and that will be of huge utility to the human race, right? But at the same time, perhaps we can temper that with some introspection and some kind of a philosophical thought here, and maybe draw some line between one and the other.
All right.
All right.
Well, yes, thank you.
All right, Professor. Thank you very much.
Yep.
All right.